Good afternoon. It's great to see those of you here this afternoon in the West Bethany Chapel, and greetings to those of you who are watching from the warmth of your home. I see the sun has finally come out, and hopefully the temperatures are going up. I'm Evon Bergey. I am the Chief Operating Officer for Landis Communities and Landis Homes, and it's a joy to be with you today. Joining me are Elizabeth Soto. Elizabeth was born in Puerto Rico. She lived much of her adult life in Lancaster with her husband, Frank Albrecht. She has two daughters. She is a professor of practical theology and at one time filled the role as moderator of Mennonite Church USA. Max Winters is with us also. Max is an architect with a Master of Architecture with a focus on environments for older adults and in relation to their communities. Max grew up in Lebanon County, now lives in Pittsburgh. He spent 9 years with Perkins Eastman, a very large national architecture firm, and a year and a half ago, switched his employment to RLPS, also a large national firm located in Lidditz. So Max is working with us on our dementia-friendly spaces. The presentation that we are prepared to share with you today was originally prepared for Leading Age National 2024. Leading Age is an industry organization that we are a member of. We present, we go to their conferences to try and stay abreast of the trends in the field. This was prepared to challenge those of us in senior living, those of us providers and folks we work with like architects, to think about what we do as not only impacting those we serve, but also raising the bar and impacting our larger communities. When we do the right thing for the right reasons, our impact can be greater than just us. So Max, take it away.
Thank you, Yvonne. So I'm going to start by giving a very brief introduction to the presentation in general, so you can kind of see where we're going, and then we'll go through each of the three parts. So one more note about my sort of role and my perspective. I work with senior living communities all around the country. So I don't have the experience you all have of living in a senior living community on a day-to-day basis, but I have a very wide cross-section, and I see what a lot of different communities are doing, where they are today, where they're headed in the future, and sort of able to provide a little bit of a larger cross-section of the industry in general. And that's where we're going to start the presentation, and that's where we started when we were in Nashville last November. And so if we think about kind of the history of even what is senior living, most senior living communities started from a point of their mission-driven origins. So most communities did actually start out of a faith tradition. In the United States, a lot of that is different Christian denominations or Jewish communities where they had congregations or communities of people that shared a faith, and they realized that part of that faith was respecting and providing for their elders. And so originally this was probably done a little bit more informally in people's homes and things like that. But especially in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, we started to get these formalized places that we called either homes for the aged or things like that, that were the first senior living communities. And again, it was this very sort of one-to-one thing of our faith tells us that we need to serve these people, and so we will do that. In the roughly 150 years since then, a lot has changed. And so this is a little slide that looks at kind of what is maybe a very abstracted timeline of the history of senior living. So the origins on the left, the future on the right. And I'll make three quick points about sort of what has been the trajectory of senior living communities during that time. The first one is that on the bottom of this slide, we see a shift from something that was totally needs-based. Again, we have these people in our community that need to be taken care of, to something that is a mixture of both needs-based and lifestyle-based. So again, in 1890, there weren't, 2,500 square foot independent living apartments with parking underneath, right? That is much more of a lifestyle-based value proposition or product. And so that's been a transition over time. In the middle of the 20th century, we have a lot of legislation that gets passed, the Older Americans Act, the creation of Medicaid, Medicare. This sort of brings the government into the picture and says that people who are caring for older adults are now part of our sort of societal and governmental safety net. It's not just within that community of that faith tradition, but it's a larger sort of societal thing at a national level. So that's another big change that's happened over the history of senior living. The last one that I want to point out is on the top part of the slide, which says for-profit competition. So again, with the Medicare and Medicaid, and also with the creation of things like assisted living and independent living, it's no longer this sort of benevolent, mission-driven thing exclusively. It's now something that companies have said that we can make profit by providing this service, right? And so over time, there's been a shift from it just being these sort of missional organizations providing this service to for-profit companies also providing this service with a very different sort of goal in mind. So if we think about where we are today, we're at the intersection of all these different forces that have changed what it means to provide housing and services for older adults. And when we were speaking to an audience at Leading Age, this is exclusively not-for-profit, mission-driven providers. And so the question we asked them is, in that increasingly complex landscape, what is the purpose of a nonprofit senior living organization in today's landscape? Again, many came from that original thing where we're trying to care for the people in our community and in our faith tradition. But with all these other things going on, what is our purpose and who are we as an organization, and what does that mean for our residents and also for the communities that we operate inside of? And so the presentation that we're giving today is offering one possible answer to that question. And when we were thinking about this and trying to describe it, we liked this terminology of the community benefiting organization. And so this term is not ours. We didn't make it up. Other people have used it in other ways. There was a sort of kerfuffle 10 or 15 years ago about just changing the word nonprofit to community benefiting because they like the term better. But we're going to use it in a very specific way today. And that is sort of under that blue line there, which is a community benefiting organization we're describing as an organization that serves the community more holistically, so the wider community, through the act of serving older adults. So today we're going to talk about primary impacts and secondary impacts. So primary impact being providing housing and services for older adults who need it, right? Again, that's the origin, that's the mission. But is there a way to, through that primary impact, provide a wider benefit and participate more broadly in our cities, towns, and neighborhoods where we find ourselves? So that's the question we're going to ask. And hopefully, we'll provide the answer that yes, that is possible. And so we're looking at Landis communities as a case study for that premise of the primary and secondary impacts. And we're going to do it in 3 parts. So there's going to be 3 sections of the presentation. Section 1, we're titling Lifting All Boats, which is about the role of community benefiting organizations in fueling the sustainability of other organizations and taking a lifting all boats mentality. And Evon's going to walk us through that section. The second section we're calling Catalyzing the Community. So how can the act of serving older adults actually make the communities and the neighborhoods and the cities that we live in thrive and flourish economically, socially, and all of those great things? That'll be a tag team between all 3 of us. And then the third section is a shorter section called New Directions, and it's specifically looking at how do we look at dementia services and care more holistically and take a more community-facing approach to it, and Evon's going to talk about that. So that's the outline for today's presentation. We've got a lot to cover, so we'll get right into it. And Evon is going to take us through the first section, which we titled Lifting All Boats.
Thank you, Max. And I am just getting over a cold, so if you can't hear me, just raise your hand and I'll get closer to the mic. This way? Okay. So lifting all boats. We are living in a time of changing demographics. In the senior living space, many of us are thriving. It's a dynamic and exciting environment to be in. Some organizations are struggling. Some are looking to affiliations as a way to survive. Others are looking at affiliations as a way to grow stronger. Either way, we must be nimble, and we look at a lot of data. We look at data like age and demographics, financial assets of new retirees, desires for more amenities, and the gap between Medicare reimbursement and the cost of care. We must constantly be making adjustments in our business model. What are the adjustments we need to make? I would propose that adjustments are table stakes. Gotta do it. Do we add SNF beds? Do we reduce our number of SNF as skilled nursing facility? Do we reduce our SNF beds? What do we do with memory care? Do we create more locked memory care units? Is our personal care too big or too little? Do we have the right actuarial formularies to know who is eligible to move into Landis Homes? We must do all of that, and yet they do not get at the crux of what we need to do. So, innovation or table stakes. If we really want to raise the bar, we need to ask different questions. What is it that individuals we serve want and need? What is it that their families want and need? What is it to improve the quality of life for individuals and their families? And what is the community impact? Are we asking? And if we are asking, are we listening? And are we really hearing? For example, what do older adults need and want to remain active in the home of their choice? How do we define that? And how do we respond? Are we looking past our property lines and into the surrounding community? When we truly do this, how does it change our approach? When we truly do this, how does it raise the bar for everyone? So, back in 2028, and you've heard Larry Zook tell this story, the Landis Homes Board did an appreciative inquiry process to really hear what was the community saying, what was it that they wanted, and what was it that they needed. And we heard loud and clear, keep Landis Homes strong and vital, provide affordable living options, provide services at home, and develop creative partnerships in support of the above. These strategic imperatives have driven our work since 2008. I mentioned affiliations. The operational and financial climate is really looking at affiliations, and the conversation is happening throughout the senior living industry, as well as the healthcare industry. Lancaster General with Penn Medicine, you can name it. As we consider our rationale for considering an affiliation, is it for our survival? Is it for our financial security? Or is there a greater purpose, possibly for community impact? Having care options that are by and for the community is important. Healthcare is local. Healthcare is local. So, what is our role in sustaining the mission of these types of communities? And are we taking a rising all tides approach? So thinking about the primary and secondary impact, we are using Welsh Mountain Home as a case study. 100 years ago, what is now an affordable personal care home was created. At that time, residents at Welsh Mountain Home were called inmates. Can you imagine? And their mission was, the purpose of this home shall be to supply a place of rest and recuperation for the convalescent. This organization thrived for many years. It was and is the beloved home of Eastern Lancaster County on top of Welsh Mountain. The local community and the local churches have supported the home for the past 100 years. They are trusted, and for their loved ones, when they are no longer able to care for them in the home, Welsh Mountain Home is an option. More recently, with the regulatory changes that Max described, Welsh Mountain Home began to struggle. At the same time, Landis Homes was having their transformational missional conversation back in 2008. What was once an organization that was developed to serve retired pastors and missionaries, now many of those are not able to come to Landis Homes. How do we provide affordable living opportunities for that population? This was the origin of the affiliation conversation. Landis Homes was having their transformational discussion, and Welsh Mountain Home was wondering if they could survive into the next century. So, challenges arose during the process that had to be addressed. Conversations of governance, budget, identity, and autonomy took place over several years. They did not avoid the hard conversation. Finally, there was a decision to do a full affiliation with Landis Communities as the sole member. The Welsh Mountain Home Board maintained full governance over the home, including hiring and firing of the executive director, even though their executive director now reports to Landis Communities COO, which is me. She or he also has full accountability to the board chair. Welsh Mountain Home Board articulates the mission and values of the home and has some fiduciary responsibilities, with Landis Communities having reserve powers for large capital expenditures. You could say that Landis Communities took on a large risk. You could say that Welsh Mountain Home took on a large risk. Both are true. Also true is that Landis Communities was able to fulfill an important part of their mission by including affordable personal care in the continuum that we offer. Also true is that Welsh Mountain Home is able to continue serving local community members on the mountain and is now renovating and improving that 100-year-old building with plans to expand in the near future. Landis worked very intentionally to preserve the identity of that community. For example, we did not change their logo until the board and the team was ready to do so, almost 8 years later. The local churches still nominate over 50% of the board members, and unless there is good reason for changing procedures or policies, we don't do that. We allow autonomy so that they can preserve their own personality and local commitment. The primary impact of this affiliation was that individuals continued to be served, caregivers continued to provide care. And here is an excerpt from their 100-year anniversary.
And now we are here 100 years later in celebrating that centennial. At first, this home was administered by Eastern Mennonite Missions, EMM. Years and years later, it became administered by 6 Lancaster Conference Bishop Districts, which still play a role in advising the board. Now it's operated by a board that operates within the larger constellation of Landis communities.
Okay, so we started with this question of, is it possible for organizations to serve their communities more holistically through the act of serving older adults? So Evon gave us one example of an answer to that question, which is fueling the sustainability of other organizations with a similar mission through this process of affiliation. In part 2 of the presentation, we're going to talk about catalyzing the community around us. So the cities, towns, and neighborhoods where we find ourselves. Can older adults actually be a critical asset for bolstering those cities and towns? So we're going to start with the question of what makes a place livable. And obviously there are a lot of answers to that question. Each of us would probably have individual answers that are different. The AARP has actually developed a tool that they use to measure the livability of cities, towns, and neighborhoods. So you can see on the right-hand side of the screen here the 8 domains that AARP decided are important when we're thinking about what makes a place livable. So you can see it's a variety of things from housing to transportation to social inclusion. So it's really a wide range of things. But this is a tool that they use to talk about what makes a place good for older adults to be at home. So interestingly then, they created an index from 1 to 100. So a place can be 1 livable or it can be 100 livable. And so there's a group at Harvard, the Center for Joint Housing Studies, and they combed through the indexes of all these different places around the United States. And they found a very interesting correlation when they were going through that data. There's places in cities and towns and neighborhoods that are called naturally occurring retirement communities. Okay, so this is not a structured place, this is not a place that somebody builds, but it's a place where older people tend to congregate together naturally. So you'll find a lot of these in Florida, for example. But they found a very interesting correlation in the data, which was that neighborhoods with a higher concentration of older adults, again, these sort of naturally occurring pockets where people tend to gather, actually scored lower on this livability index than other cities, towns, and neighborhoods. And so there were a couple different reasons that they highlighted for that, but a lot of that had to do with sort of opportunity, economic vibrancy, and diversity, both in demographic diversity, but also just diversity of places and spaces to go. And so correlation proves nothing, it just proves correlation. But this was a very interesting data point that says that if we sort of put older adults together exclusively in an area, and it's not sort of an intergenerational mixed-use kind of place, it actually scores lower on this livability index. So that, I think, asks a very important question for people who provide housing and services for older adults, where we're congregating them all together and trying to make the place as livable as it can be, which is, can we construct livability? If we build a building or a campus that's sort of out away from the cities, towns, and neighborhoods where people live and work and thrive, are we taking something away from the vibrancy and the livability of that place? And so this is a quote from a woman named Jane Jacobs. She was an author and kind of an urban sociologist in the 20th century, and she wrote a lot about cities and vibrancy, and she did a lot of case studies looking at sort of housing projects that were built in the 60s and the 70s, where people in certain neighborhoods of certain socioeconomic statuses were sort of congregated together in a single place, and she found some very interesting things. And this was a quote from one of her greatest books. Cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they are created by everybody. So when we think about places for older adults, to what extent are older adults involved in the process of creating those places versus how are we as architects and contractors and things like that creating places for people? So I think that's an important question. The other element of this that we talked about during this presentation, and again, we're addressing, an audience of senior living providers, is this question of longevity capital and social capital. So longevity capital is a fancy phrase that basically talks about what is the role and what is the value of older adults to make a community thrive and make it active and make it successful. So when we ask older adults to come out of the city, town, or neighborhood and move to our senior living community, we're removing them from those neighborhoods and we're removing their participation in those neighborhoods. And so on the left-hand side, we see maybe a list of challenges that senior living communities are trying to struggle with these days. They're struggling with the fact that senior living communities aren't intergenerational. Everyone is of the same sort of generation and demographic strata. They're trying to give their residents a sense of purpose. People want to volunteer, people want to be involved in organizations, and that can be hard depending on how isolated a senior living community is. And as Evon alluded to, a lot of senior living organizations are struggling with this question of mission, who are we actually trying to serve, and can anybody afford what we're trying to do? On the right-hand side of the screen, we see some challenges that cities, towns, and neighborhoods are struggling with. Many neighborhoods and cities are struggling with a sense of social contribution from their members. People don't have a sense of ownership and belonging in their neighborhood or in their city. They're struggling with maintaining rich cultural legacies that they've had over a long time because people are moving out and sort of churning out of that neighborhood. And some neighborhoods struggle with economic participation. The literal money is leaving the neighborhood and going somewhere else. And so when we think about a senior living community that feels disconnected from its context, and we think about a neighborhood or a city that's facing all of these challenges, the natural question then is how can we sort of re-link these things together and get this feedback loop of the longevity capital of the older adults participating in and having a sense of purpose and pride in their neighborhood and some of those challenges that senior living communities are facing. So to kind of summarize this section here, when we think about primary impacts and secondary impacts of senior living organizations, this is a crucial concept for organizations to think about and understand. If we are just developing housing and services in a kind of bubble that's out and separate from our context, are we sort of perpetuating some of these problems, and are we only focusing on that primary impact of, yes, we got the people here and we're serving them, so we've succeeded, versus can we serve people on site in the city, town, or neighborhood where they already live? And does that help with some of these secondary impacts of supporting the local economy, supporting the local social infrastructure, and having more of that broader secondary impact? So we're going to look at Lancaster City as an example of that, and Landis Communities as an example of that. So first we're going to hear from Marshall Snively, who's the president of the Lancaster City Alliance. And then we're going to take a look at what Landis has done in downtown Lancaster and what some of the impacts that has had on that city are.
The development of Landis Place on King has been extraordinary for this block. This block has always been an integral part of downtown, but having this new construction here, new residents, and using a site that was very underutilized actually really adds to the vibrancy of not only just this block, but the city. It is actually helping us expand the core footprint of downtown west and connecting to other neighborhoods within the city.
All the right reasons why Lancaster. Lancaster has a beautiful history. And many of you may already know it. It's been home for me and my family for 3 decades, over 30 years. I love the city. But did you know that the birth of the city was 1730, a few decades before the Declaration of Independence? So Lancaster became the first in-city, inland community away from the 13 colonies that all share the ocean and the shore of the East Coast, from Boston all the way to Georgia, right? The Carolinas. So we became that little hub for people to come in and have their vacation little cottages, but that it became a small little developing community. In that city then, during the Civil War and post the Civil War, it became a key place for the Underroad Railroad. There have been some early excavations that have found these locations. The primary church that was key is the African Methodist Episcopalian Church, AME, the African American church located in the southeast part of the city on Strawberry Street. Still today, they offer lives, history, and banquets celebrating the proud sense of welcoming the free men and women of African descendants into a free world. But not only the African Americans or the Black community did that, but other prestige people like Thaddeus Stevens and others. So those are two important history momentums that said we are in the midst of striving, beautiful history of diversity from its get-go. And that's why we arrive, and it was time for us to make home Landis. Let's talk about Landis Place on King.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So the picture on the slide is of Yule Plaza in downtown Lancaster, and the next slide is going to be an aerial showing a map of downtown Lancaster, and that plaza is in that very strangely shaped blue blob at the top of the screen there, so just to orient you. And so this is downtown Lancaster City, okay? And on the left-hand side, you can see kind of a list of amenities that you will find within kind of this quarter-mile walking distance in downtown Lancaster: food and beverage, farmers market, cultural amenities, theater amenities, galleries, boutiques, all of these things. And these are the things that we talked about before that make a place livable. The places and the sort of physical structures and businesses and cultural institutions. These are the things that make a place livable, the things that we try to replicate when we build a senior living community that's sort of out and away. So, with all of these amenities and features of downtown Lancaster, Landis Communities decided that developing housing and services for seniors in downtown was an important part of achieving this mission. So we're going to look at two examples. Building A is the first project that we're going to look at, and Building B is the second project we're going to look at, and you can see where they sit in that context. So Building A on that chart was Steeple View Lofts. So just to make sure, credit where credit is due, this was not an RLPS Architects project. This was Lefevre Funk, another great local firm. And this was an adaptive reuse of an existing building. So this was a metalworking factory. I'm sure it was other things in its life. But when we think about primary and secondary impact, obviously the primary impact here is that these are places that are welcoming and empowering for older adults. But when we think about adaptive reuse, the secondary impact there is that the existing building stock in Lancaster gets reused, gets a new life, and continues to be sort of the buildings that make up Lancaster, right? So again, when you develop on-site, you get that secondary impact. So these were age-restricted apartments in the 700 to 1,000 square foot range, so these are a little bit more modest. And this was developed using historic tax credits. Again, so these are financial incentives for people to reuse existing buildings and almost recycle them to an extent. And you can see on the right-hand side, the upper right-hand, the interior of that. And then on the ground floor, in that center picture, you see that there's space for some of these institutions that we were talking about. So in this case, a gallery space at the street level that's continuing to be in that neighborhood and serve the people of that neighborhood. Again, thinking about that secondary impact. So again, we're serving older adults by providing them housing, the ability to stay in their current neighborhood, and the ability to support amenities in that neighborhood. The second project was B on that map, and that was an RLPS Architects project. This was a ground-up build. This was not an adaptive reuse project, and this was called Landis Place on King. It was built on the site of an existing restaurant called Rendezvous, and this was, again, apartments for older adults. And I think the main story here is about sort of the wider variety of socioeconomic classes that this was able to serve. So these apartments are not just serving people who can sort of strictly afford it, but there's a mixture of apartments that are subsidized and sort of intermixed into the economic makeup of the building so that people of all strata can live there and people can remain in the neighborhood. So they don't have to move out to some other place that they're not familiar with or that they don't identify with. They can stay in downtown Lancaster. So part of the premise of this building is that obviously it's mostly apartments, and in a normal senior living community you would develop a bunch of amenities too, a gym, a pool, yada, yada, yada. But the idea here is that all of those amenities that we looked at on that map of downtown Lancaster are the amenities for the building. And so again, you're tapping into what's there, you're allowing people to stay in place, and you're contributing to the economy and the vibrancy of that street and of that neighborhood that Marshall talked to us a little bit about. And someone can correct me because it's not my story to tell, but I understand that there was a resident who now lives in Landis Place on King who ate the last cheesesteak at Rendezvous before the construction started. And now on the first floor of the building, there's a tenant space for a restaurant that was taken over by the next generation of that family. And that resident then ate the first cheesesteak at the new generation of Rendezvous. So as a funny story, and cheesesteaks are great, but it really illustrates that premise of allowing people to maintain the place and the culture that's so important to them through the act of providing housing for older adults. So I think it's a great story to illustrate that secondary impact. So we're actually going to hear from a resident of Landis Place on King, and then Elizabeth is going to tell us a little bit more about the process that was gone through to develop Landis Place on King and how that was also incorporating the neighborhood and the residents.
Downtown Lancaster is central. You have access to Central Market, you have access to the galleries and the shops here at Lancaster within walking distance. You make connections. We have people from all over the world here at Landis Place on King. And we come together, we cook together, we learn different cultures, we learn different languages together. So it's just a cultural place where we can learn from each other and grow together and love together and be a family together.
Beautiful testimony, isn't it? But Landis community didn't this just arrive as a parachute to Lancaster City. It slowly started with a housing project and Steeple View Loft, had experience, start doing some tutoring, reading, volunteers in the public school, getting involved, what we do, good service. Then came the dream to build this wonderful new building. So Landis communities were practicing cross-cultural skills, but they needed to know too what the embracing the diversity meant. In that aspect, they invited me to be part of the envisioning process, so I became their community consultant for diversity. In doing that, we were able to reach a lot of people who have been living in the city, African Americans, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans. I was committed that they were people who had been there 50, 60 years already in the city before I had arrived, people that we knew about, and tell them the story that we were going to have brand new apartments for their comfort. So we reached out and we wanted to be, in that time we knew that housing for the adult that's aging was an issue, was a real need in the city. And now it's much more, given the prices. So one of the things as a culture broker, I understood the vision, what the idea was, and then was to reproduce and not only translate it into Spanish, into the diverse communities, but to live it in and let them understand that we really wanted to offer what we call affordable apartments. In doing such a thing, we went ahead, that was before, we wanted it to, from the beginning, the promotion of the material, not only to be translated material, but adapted material to a universal Spanish context. And when I sat down as seniors, communities like the African American, to be able to listen to them, for them to educate me and for me to present what Landis Homes on King wanted to offer. Landis Place on King, excuse me. In doing so as well, we knew that doing the blessing of the location was as important as when we get there to live. So we invited key people from the larger community. Reverend Shayna Watson was one of my star students from Lancaster Theological Seminary. She came in from one of the Pentecostal big churches and then became Episcopalian. Can you believe that? But wonderful, she is a mother, father, priest today in Washington, D.C. She's one of my star students. And I said, Shayna, you must come and do a libation as an African-American in your generation, in your ancestors here. Another aspect, across the street, the Pentecostal pastor, Pastor Roman, will you come and give the blessing en español, por favor, in Spanish. So we networked all across, bringing in. And very important was, from the get-go, the planification of this blessing. We decided that it wasn't going to be a groundbreaking, sound like so invasive. It was going to be a blessing of the land that we are going to inhabit. But before that, there were other people, First Nation communities who inhabit that place. We needed to honor, so we did a land recognition, and we asked Jessie to come in from First Nation communities. I think she's from the York area, to come and do a special blessing as well with the tree of peace and giving the offering of the tobacco in their own language. So it was very important, and we'll hear Reverend Shayna do her.
We acknowledge our ancestors, those who came to this country by force or through freedom. We acknowledge that freedom is not free and is a cost paid for by those who felt connected with the earth, with our siblings across the world, and with a deeper understanding of our faith and a deeper understanding of God in the world. We acknowledge that the past affects our present, and to help us to continue to be mindful of all of the lives and the ground and all of God's creation that we touch. We pray for the present.
Isn't that beautiful? In order to live well, we need to start well. And we started very well, embracing those leaders who were there before we did. So we had then the peace tree as well as the ground blessing event. Then we continued doing focus groups in Spanish. I think I did overlap in English 2 from Dorothy Hartman, and then I did 5 in Spanish over at our offices at Steeple View. And that all the materials by that time, thanks to the communication department, Brother Larry Gingrich, we had everything in Spanish ready to go and to answer the questions of people who were saying, I am interested. I had conversations on the radio show, Radio Centro, 91.3, if you ever want a good Spanish music, it's always there 24 hours. And then we did the blessing within our Christian tradition. It was important as well that we learned what the difference for me between low income and affordability. There's a fine line there, and I was able to know that there are definitely a lot of low income individuals that need it, but affordability on the other side meant another financial level. So I needed to learn that challenge. The other last thing I want to say, that Landis communities did not come to do something that other agencies have done in the city, taking out the people who live there. We call gentrification. No. They came in to give a contribution. They folded themselves within the community. We're still learning to do that. And we preserve the original makeup of the community and make sure that it's accessible. So those are the key points that we continue to be living those principles at Landis Place and King.
So you've heard from Max and Elizabeth that we have a little street cred in Lancaster City. We have that by being very intentional in what we did. The World Health Organization created something called age-friendly cities. Age-friendly cities is a framework that addresses the capacity of cities and towns to holistically serve older adults. So we said, is this something that Lancaster City might want to do? We actually went to the county first. One of the requirements is that you need the top ranking official of the geographical area to send a letter and sign on to this. The county commissioners didn't understand it, and so they were not really interested, and so we went to the city. And in going to the city, we went with one of our collaborative partnerships, which is the Lancaster Downtowners. And we asked the mayor, would you have interest in becoming an age-friendly city? And the mayor said, of course. So we applied for the designation and were awarded the designation. And then we began the planning process. And the Age-Friendly Cities has 8 domains, and you can choose 1 or 8 or any number in between to work your plan. So we chose 4 areas, 4 domains: communication, intergenerational connections, create and preserve housing, and Vision Zero. Vision Zero is a goal of the mayor's to have 0 pedestrian deaths by automobiles. So we worked with different organizations within the city to work on each of those, and you can understand why our goals for communication, intergenerational connection, and just housing, and of course Vision Zero, align well with our mission. So that is an ongoing effort that we are doing with other organizations in the city, and really with the Lancaster Downtowners and the mayor's office. We are supporting that. So that's an example of some of the secondary impact that some of our work and street cred is doing. So now this is section 3. We're moving into section 3. Thank you. So, Landis Homes. This is thinking about new directions that we're taking now. In 1998, 26 years ago, Landis Homes is 61 years old. In 1998, 26 years ago, Landis Homes was innovative in creating 3 memory care centers. We called this the Heritage. It was a healthcare household, Lancaster House, a personal care household, Lidditz House, and Eden East, which is no longer in existence, but it's was called the Heritage. And those 3 entities were cutting edge. They were secure, another word for locked, and they were designed well. They were designed with low lighting, and the nurse's station was placed in the center of the household so the nurses could keep a compassionate, caring eye on the residents. Large social areas were included where individuals with memory loss could spend their days in comfortable chairs. In the case of a resident that wanted to wander, the doors were secured for their safety. Staff were trained to be compassionate, and Landis Homes quickly gained a reputation for quality of care for individuals with memory loss. A wait list for those households and program grew, and we still have a wait list for Lancaster House and Lidditz House. Soon, many other organizations were doing the same. Eventually, we added 2 more secure healthcare households. I would argue that what was once innovative may not be considered innovative today. Secure residential care environments, limit individuals' autonomy, ability to go where they want. I attended a leading age training on dementia, and at the end of the series, those of us that were invited to this small cohort were challenged with this question: when will we be comfortable unlocking the doors? Secure units still create an institutional environment. Residents do not have the ability to access the public realm for social connection. It segregates people with dementia and splits up couples. Why should we, as community benefiting organizations, care about that? Well, I would suggest we have a missional expertise in aging and caregiving that is unique. We have a perspective around the dignity of life that is unique. And we have a historical position of advocacy. For example, the Kendall and Untie the Elderly legislation. It wasn't that long ago that we moved away from not just secure units, but actual restraints. So I would argue that it is important for us to begin thinking about what's next, what is innovative. And I do want to put a plug in here for Landis Homes. At one time, we had 4 households and 1 adult day that were secure. We are down to 2. We're moving in the right direction, and there still may always be a need for some. But I would argue that it is time for us to think in new and innovative ways about how we serve individuals with dementia. When will we be uncomfortable unlocking the doors? We are asking this question: what is it that residents want? What is it that spouses and families want? How do we support caregivers? And what do we know now about dementia that we did not know 10 years ago or 30 years ago? And what is our definition of secure? Can we expand that definition? When will we begin to weigh the benefit of autonomy and the risk of safety? And that is what we are challenging ourselves to do today. What would it look like if Landis Homes was a center of excellence for dementia care? Our board has committed to becoming that, and we are on the journey. What will it look like if we provide a dementia-friendly experience for each resident, client, and family member that we serve? And how might we provide this in a way that impacts the greater community? That's part of that secondary impact. And will that eventually result in reducing the stigma and normalizing what it means to have dementia?
Okay, we made it through all 3 parts. I'm just going to do a quick conclusion, and then we can take a couple questions from the folks that are here. So in the conclusion of the presentation, there were sort of 3 challenges to people at the conference who are Evon's colleagues and things like that. I think the takeaway that I would submit to you all here and those of you watching at home is just that you are part of a community and organization that is challenging the senior living industry. And we went up and gave this presentation at a national conference and said, this is what we're doing. How can you learn from it? So I think you should all feel an immense sense of pride that your community and your organization is leading the way on some of these questions. So the 3 takeaways on the slides were more sort of questions and challenges for our audience there. But just because Landis is doing such a great job of innovating today doesn't mean they can stop asking these questions. Evon talked about that at the beginning. We have to keep asking those questions. So I'll ask all of you to keep asking these questions to Evon and Larry and Corey when you see them in the hallways, okay? So here's 3 questions you might ask them when you see them. Number 1, what's your mission? Is providing housing and services for older adults the absolute extent of your mission? Or is your mission to impact the community and the world around you through the act of serving older adults? Question number 2 is about the role of place in serving older adults. This was that second section we talked about. Ask them, are you empowering older adults to remain connected to their communities? Ask them how they're helping to distribute the longevity of the capital of the people they're serving. They'll love if you ask them that question. Question number 3 is this question of serving through listening. So again, not just being content with what we're doing today, but going back and continuing that active inquiry process, asking different and deeper questions about what do the people we serve need, and what does our community and our town and our local area need. So that was a presentation we gave. We hope you found it interesting. We're happy to take a few questions from the people that are with us here. If you're at home and you have a question, you're going to have to yell it really, really loud, okay? Anybody here have a question or a comment they want to share?
My question has to do with what's being considered as ways for people to be able to find their way through the buildings in terms of signage, colors. It's a very easy place to get lost. And I used to remember, okay, the ground floor is green and the top floor is blue, grass, sky. But that's not necessarily what we're seeing throughout the buildings. And I just think that when we're trying to be friendly to people who are having failing memory, it would be really helpful to have better ways for people to find their way.
I love that question, and I'm going to pose that to our team. Every time we do any sort of renovation, we are committed to having dementia-friendly spaces every time we build or do a redecorate. And you're right, differences on floors. So, if I'm on the burgundy floor and the elevator opens on the blue floor, I might not be home yet. So, thank you.
Any other thoughts or questions that someone wanted to share?
One of the issues that comes up from time to time is we want to meet somebody in a certain place. And one of the places that, since we live in Harvest View, one of the things that is a problem there is there's not really a front door, and somebody arriving on campus doesn't see where the back door is. And there are doors 4 or 5 places around the building. We've wondered from sometimes if the doors couldn't have a code number on them, so that we might be able to say, well, meet us at door number E5 or 17 or, yeah, some kind of way to find those doors where you want to meet somebody.
Thanks, Roland. So you were, yeah, thank you, duly noted. Lois. And thanks, Marilyn.
This is maybe fairly long range, but when will our people in skilled care or more intensive nursing care have the possibility of experiencing downtown Lancaster?
I love the challenge, and Lois used to work downtown for the Office of Aging. Wow. I love you pushing us. Thank you. Yes.
Since I live in the South Campus, in following up to what Roland was talking about with the door numbers, I still think it would be a very easy fix to put on the outside of the hybrids, hybrid 1, hybrid 2, hybrid 3, 4, 5, 6. I know there was a discussion way long ago to give them bird names or tree names or something, I don't know what. And then they stayed with the numbers that they have. And the numbers on the side of the building, to me, don't mean anything. It means from this number to this number, you can find those apartments. And I think everybody in this room refers to, well, I live in hybrid 3, I live in hybrid 4, and when they're going to build new hybrids, they could be 7 and 8 and 9. I just think it would help everybody who's trying to find somebody here on campus.
That's a very practical suggestion, and I've been here almost 9 years. And I agree, it's hard to know, well, which hybrid am I going to? Because we don't refer to them as 1500s or 16. Okay. That's even easier than some of these others. Yes.
I'm wondering how much culture is interpreted into many different understandings of people with dementia. Will we ever be able to put them together and have a unit of dementia, because cultural background and dementia itself has a lot of different ways in which we interpret and look at life.
So to repeat the question, how do we think about dementia with different cultures?
Thank you for that question. As I am aging, and because I have a mother that has dementia in Puerto Rico, I have many of my elderly neighbors in the southeast area, and they bring in their cultures. Plus, we have new immigrants, and some of them already bring in a different level of dementia as well. I will refer to more the family values. The culture comes family values too. I want to refer to what the family will like that individual to have around them, first of all. Second is, I hear behind the question more the inclusion versus the excluding, which is within the spirit of what we are trying to bring across to the new endeavors. I love the question, and I hope that the administration creates ways of defining cultures, or letting the culture to define themselves, first of all, and second, figuring out what is it that residents wants and needs, and without imposing, right? So I guess we can take different dimensions of that question.
Can I add something to that? Is that okay? So I just wanted to share something that I've seen in my sort of study of senior living. And this is not to say that Landis will do this. This is not endorsed by the Landis communities, okay? But I went to the Netherlands a few years ago and saw a community there for people living with dementia called Hogeway Dementia Village, okay? And so they have residents that live in small groups of maybe 6 to 7 people in a house. And how they handle that question of sort of culture is that they, before you move in to their dementia community, they try to learn as much about your sort of daily rhythms as possible. So it's about, when do you wake up? When do you eat lunch? What do you eat for lunch? Do you eat a big meal at lunch? Do you eat a small meal for dinner? And then they actually try to match people together in a house who are going to share some of those same daily rhythms. So it might be that there's, and so this is Dutch culture, so take it for what it's worth, but so they might have a house of people that all lived in sort of an urban center, and so they save up their meal dollars and they have these big sort of fancy cosmopolitan dinners on weekends, and they live more frugally during the week, right? But they've already determined that the residents that they're looking at, that was sort of what they're used to or what their daily rhythms were. So they actually go through this exercise of trying to connect people, not necessarily who come from the same place or look the same way, but who share some of these cultural touchstones that are going to affect their daily rhythm. So again, I'm not saying that that is something Landis will do, but that's one answer to that question that I've seen in my kind of research of senior living. Okay? You want to wrap us up, Evon?
Okay, thank you all for coming. Thank you those who are with us on TV, as we say. It's been a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for your questions and your challenges, and a special thanks to Elizabeth Soto and Max Winters.